air sampling in response to community complaints about, particularly about odors, but definitely about some health effects and things like that. So we're really happy to have everybody with us tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We do have some folks calling in, and that's completely fine. We'll do our best to explain what's on the screen for you so that you get the most out of your participation tonight. But I do just want to mention really briefly, if anybody who is calling in has the ability or would like to join by computer instead, you can, and you still have time to go to michigan.gov/EGLE, EGLE, and then the word Stellantis. So EGLE Stellantis, and the link to join us virtually via computer is right there. So you don't have to register ahead of time or anything like that. I'm just putting that out there in case anybody would like to join us in that way instead. A few just housekeeping things before the meeting really gets started. Your lines are going to be muted during the meeting today. So for the most part, until we get to question and answer, and I'll go over that in just a minute as well. We're going to be recording this meeting. So this meeting, along with all of our other public meetings, are posted on Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy's YouTube channel. So if you ever are interested in past meetings, there have been some other meetings related to this facility that have been recorded in the past. This meeting is being recorded and we will be posting it on that website as well. One of the great things about viewing things on that website is if you or someone you know has English as a second language, you can view those transcriptions in a variety of different languages, which is sometimes helpful to people as well. I know the transcriptions we have tonight are just in English, but it does give you a little bit more opportunity to view things in other languages if that is helpful for you. So I just wanted to let you know that as a follow-up to this meeting, I will be sending an email. Hopefully, at least most of you got an email from me. Anybody who had registered ahead of time and had registered by noon today, I did send an email out just with some updates about things that have been posted to that EGLE Stellantis website. So that's michigan.gov/EGLE Stellantis, and I'll share that on screen later. But we have posted a variety of other things related to this meeting throughout the week today. So I just wanted to make sure folks get a heads up. You'll get another email from me if you attended and provided an email address, just with the link to the recording, link to the website, and maybe some other things that we end up chatting about tonight. So how we're going to run things tonight, because we have sort of multiple partners that want to be able to share information and answer questions, is we're going to kind of chunk this up a little bit. First, we're going to be hearing from EGLE, from our inspector for the facility. And then once that, it's a very short presentation, just a little bit on the background. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But then we'll look for some questions in the chat box. So if you're putting questions in the question and answer box, that's where I'm going to look for those questions related to what Bob's going to talk about. We're going to move over to our EPA partner and kind of do the same thing, and then DHHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, and kind of do the same thing. And then we'll have an overall Q&A at the end. So just in case folks have a particular question in the beginning that we can get to, or maybe we misspoke on something or something like that, we want to make sure we get to that right away and give you guys an opportunity to ask us to clarify whatever we just talked about. So getting to that question and answer, if you are joining us online, you will have a question and answer button. So one of the best things to do, at least in this beginning portion, is going to be to type your question into that question and answer section. When we get to the end of the night after the presentations, we will allow folks to, especially folks that are calling in, to raise their hand if they want to ask a question. And what I will do with that, and I'll remind you of this when we get to that part, is I will be calling on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. So if you're like me, sometimes I either get confused between my work and my home number, or maybe I'm thinking of one of my kids' numbers or whatever. So just make sure what those last 4 digits are that you're phoned in on, so that if I'm trying to call on you and unmute you're aware of that. Like I said, you will be able to click that raised hand icon at the bottom of the screen. If you're calling in, you're just going to click #2 on your phone, and that's going to raise your hand virtually for me so that I can see that it's raised. But that question and answer box is probably going to be the easiest way for you to get your questions answered tonight. So I want to invite my panelists to please turn your cameras on just for a second. I want to introduce folks. They're not going to be chatting with you right now, but just so that you can see everybody who's going to be on the line tonight. So again, my name's Jennifer, and I'm going to be moderating. The first person that you're going to hear from is Bob Burns, and he's with our Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE as well. So he's the inspector for the Stellantis facility that we're going to be talking about, and he's going to give you some background and some company information. He's going to be talking a little bit about our Air Quality Division's investigations, how we do odor observations, kind of what we've seen, a little bit about the complaints, the compliance stuff with the violations ongoing, and then a little bit about the odor plan that Stellantis submitted to us. So he's going to be chatting with you first as soon as I'm finished kind of going over these ground rules. Once Bob's done, like I said, we'll do a quick Q&A if there's anything that we need to kind of clarify from what Bob talked about. Then I'm going to send it over to Marta Foucault. She is with the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and she's going to be talking about a certain kind of air sampling that we did virtually. That was probably in the early fall now in November. And there is a map that we're going to show kind of with all these different sampling events that we're talking about. So she's going to talk specifically about that one, what they did, and then the findings from that. And then I have Brandon Reed, and he's from our Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. He's going to be talking about some other sampling that was done and the results that we have gotten from that. And we're going to be talking a little bit about next steps and where you can find more information, who you can contact. You can obviously get a hold of any of us that are chatting with you tonight, but also we'll have some other resources where you can get a hold of people if you have further questions after the meeting or we don't end up getting to everything tonight. But I would encourage you to check out that website. It's going to have a lot of information that will maybe enhance some of the things that you get tonight, or maybe things we can't do as deep of a dive in as we go through the night. So one thing I just want to talk about really quickly before I hand it over to Bob, just to kind of set the stage for tonight. And Marta and Brandon, if you guys want to turn your cameras off, you can do that. It's up to you. So really just want to talk a little bit about why we're here tonight. And this is really important because I know folks have spent a lot of time and have a lot of concerns associated with the nuisance odors and the health effects from those nuisance odors that folks have been experiencing. And first of all, just want to acknowledge the appreciation that we have for people being so diligent about calling us, talking to us, letting us know what they're experiencing, because without that, we wouldn't have started this investigation as quickly as we did, and maybe not at all. So your complaints and concerns were a pertinent part of having this investigation go on. We definitely hear a lot of what you're saying. We know that you have a community that's overburdened and underrepresented in a lot of cases, and you definitely consider yourself an environmental justice community, which is appropriate. Talk to a lot of folks that I can see on my list tonight that we've chatted with about this before. So again, just greatly appreciate that, your diligence. And I know you have questions, and those questions particularly focus, at least for what we're talking about tonight, what's causing the odors that you've been experiencing. Are they affecting your health? And we know that you're having health effects from these. So can we tie those things together? Did we? I know we haven't found any immediate health effects. So things like we've had experienced with other facilities across the state where we needed to, take some immediate action, but that doesn't mean we don't have a lot to tell you about tonight. So we definitely want to talk to you about what's being done to stop the odors from going on, a bit about the overall air quality in the area. I think you'll be able to see some of the investigation and what that's covered when we talk about the map. And then really, how is Stellantis being held accountable for not installing equipment properly and for impacting community like they did. So definitely a lot to cover tonight. Appreciate your patience as we go through this. Feel free, like I said, this is being recorded. So if you have to jump off early, you can definitely get some more information later on when we share that link. So that being said, Bob, I'm going to have you go ahead and share your screen, and then you can get started on your presentation.
All right, thank you, Jen. Hello, everyone. I'm Bob Burns, and I'm the EGLE Air Quality Inspector for the Stellantis Detroit Assembly Complex.
So Bob, hold on 1 second because your screen didn't share. So try that again.
All right.
We'll get there. I'll let you know when I see it. How about that? All right, there you go. You should be all set now.
Got it? Okay, good. All right, and tonight I'm here to give you an overview of the activities going on lately, including odor complaints, stack tests, violations, and compliance. The Detroit Assembly Complex today consists of two automobile assembly plants named Jefferson North Assembly, where they make the Durango and Grand Cherokee, and Mack Assembly, where they make the Grand Cherokee L. Both auto assembly plants, like other auto assembly plants, consist of a body shop, a paint shop, and final assembly. So why are we here? EGLE has received many odor complaints from citizens over the past 6 months. We are also here because of community concerns about potential health impacts from odors around the Detroit Assembly Complex. EGLE's AQD partners, DHHS and US EPA, have conducted air sampling activities around the plant, and we want to discuss their findings. There will be more to come on the air sampling results and potential health impacts later in the MDHS presentation. The good news here is that the odor number of complaints appear to be tracking in the right direction. Investigation into the odor complaints led to 4 odor-related violations issued to the facility on September 20th and on November 3rd. When I looked further into what could be causing the odors, I determined the facility had not installed their new processes as required by their permit. Ductwork that would connect all processes to the equipment designed to reduce emissions was done incorrectly. These pieces of equipment are called a concentrator and a regenerative thermal oxidizer, or RTO. I'm going to refer to them as control equipment. The control equipment is used to reduce and destroy emissions of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. We've had quite a few questions about whether Stellantis has violated the emission limits in the air permits. In addition to responding to complaints and doing regular inspections, I review emission reports that Stellantis is required to submit as part of their permit. Results shown here are from the third quarter VOC reports. Fourth quarter VOC reports 2021 are due at the end of January. My review concurs with the data reported by Stellantis, and I did not identify any emissions violations. So what has EGLE been doing to address these odors, violations, and citizens' concerns? We will continue to respond to any citizen complaint and conduct air quality inspections. Please don't hesitate to give us a call if you are experiencing strong odors where you live. We will be continuing to review emissions and monitoring reports and observing stack tests to ensure the facility is complying with permit conditions. We have escalated enforcement in response to the violations we have issued. This type of escalated enforcement typically results in a consent order. A consent order is a legally binding agreement which will penalize the company for past violations, require actions for the company to take to minimize odors, and set up additional penalties if future non-compliance occurs. EGLE will continue to partner with the City of Detroit, DHHS, and the US EPA. Communications is important in EGLE, and we will continue to communicate with the affected communities and work with our partners who are conducting sampling in the community. Now let's talk about what Stellantis has been doing to reduce odors. In late December 2021, the ductwork was fixed to connect all the required parts of the process to the control equipment. A third-party odor study was completed, and as a result, the company plans to make 3 key changes. First would be install an additional RTO, which will further reduce VOC emissions from the plant. They will also make some changes of the existing ductwork control equipment, and they'll send that to the new RTO stack. And then lastly, they'll add additional odor management technologies for certain parts of the process, such as bipolar ionization, odor neutralization, and or chemical oxidation for odors. Hopefully that update was helpful, and I'm going to pass it back to Jennifer now. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. I think we're going to go right to Marta. So Marta, whenever you're ready, if you want to go ahead and share your screen. And because I don't have any, actually, let me just double check before you start doing that. Okay, appreciate that. So someone had asked about the full transcript. I know we have the subtitles on, and this could just be my user error that I'm not figuring that out. So I do have my co-host Mike Gurney on, and I'm going to leave it up to him to see if we can figure out if there's a different solution for you. Also had a request to let folks know how many people are listening in tonight. And we currently have 149 folks on with us. So appreciate that. It's a really nice number to have on, a lot of people interested. So that's definitely what we want. Okay, so Bob, this one is going to go to you just really quickly. If you can talk a little bit about what the permit says about odor management. Is there Rule 901 requirement actually in the permit for some of these things, or how did you end up writing those violation notices for 901?
There is the general condition in the permit for Rule 901 that says the facility shall not cause an unreasonable or objectionable odor at a person's residence or property. But as far as odor mitigation things, there are currently nothing in the permit that are specifically requirements, but we will continue to work through those and get those added into a consent order to resolve the odor violations that have been sent.
Okay, thank you. So I know that's a very specific kind of rule. When we say Rule 901, we take it for granted that folks know what we're talking about. And I apologize for saying that too, but that is the violation that was sent just for those odors. And we kind of call it our nuisance rule, but it actually is a little bit more impactful than that, because we can utilize it when things are happening like what folks identified happening out at Stellantis. One more question, and then we're going to go ahead and go to Marta so that she can give her presentation on what EPA did. So the question was, is there a deadline for Stellantis to be required to implement the 3-point plan that you talked about?
Currently, there is not a deadline, and those will be details that will be worked out further as negotiations, as the consent order move on.
All right, thanks, guys. So if we didn't get to your questions right away, I see a couple more coming in. You want to have Marta go ahead and share her screen and do her presentation, and then we'll definitely get to more of these at the end. So Marta, we see yours, but it's not in presentation mode. There you go. That looks like you've got it in. Yep, there you go. Should be able to do that. Perfect. That looks great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Good evening. My name is Marta Fuoco. I'm a scientist in the Air Division in EPA's Region 5 office in Chicago. Over the last 16 years, I've led many monitoring projects, collecting and analyzing data to respond to public concerns just like this one. I worked on developing and designing the mobile monitor that we used in this project that you're going to hear about today. We call this our mobile monitor because we've outfitted a truck, just like you see here in this photo, with specialized equipment to take very frequent air samples as we drive around. Michigan EGLE reached out to us with their concern in November, and we were able to deploy quickly a few days later. Here in Detroit, our main objective was to look for hydrogen sulfide and other pollutants, including methane, benzene, toluene, and p-xylene around the Stellantis plant. This mobile monitor is one of a few of these concepts in the nation, and it's the only one that can measure this combination of parameters. Our mobile monitor also measures wind speed and wind direction and takes a coordinated GPS reading so that for each measurement that's taken, we have the concentration, we know where the wind was coming from, how fast the wind was blowing, and the exact location when that reading was taken. So we're able to see all this information in real time in the truck. And that allows us to search for, and if we find a plume, it allows us to chase that plume. And this combination helps us find and measure what's in the air, whether that's on a facility, near a facility, or in a community. So for 2 days that we spent monitoring in the field in Detroit, we had very good monitoring conditions. Our equipment was working well. We were able to monitor very early in the morning and very late in the evening. And that's when we would expect to see the highest concentrations of some of the pollutants that we're looking for. We took 1 second measurements, and that allowed us to take over 100,000 data points to analyze over those 2 days. Most values were below reporting limits. We did observe some levels of methane that were at background levels. While we observed odors in the field, we did not measure any of the parameters that we were able to measure for with the mobile unit. In addition to the GMAP, however, we have additional tools that we can use. We can also take canister samples in the field. We take this additional canister sampling when we see that we're either measuring a pollutant with the mobile monitor, or if we smell odors, but we're not measuring anything with the mobile monitor. This additional comprehensive laboratory analysis is just another tool in our toolbox that we use to try and identify what the public is observing. So these canisters allow us to take a sample of air that we collect and then send it to a laboratory for additional analysis. This lets us look for a whole host of additional compounds that we aren't able to find with our mobile monitoring unit. And these compounds are called VOCs, and they're compounds that are emitted from certain industrial processes, such as the ones that we were looking at. And so in this case, we were able to send the canisters that we collected to the Michigan EGLE laboratory for analysis. So we compare the GMAP, the mobile data that we collect, to certain health benchmarks, such as the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. Sometimes you'll hear that shortened to ATSDR. There are minimum risk levels that you see here in this chart. The GMAP can detect levels below these values, but in some cases, the reporting limit of our instrumentation is higher than these health benchmarks. And so in these instances, it's especially useful to collect these canister samples because they can provide lower reporting limits and additional information. Also, I'd like to point out that methane here that we did measure at background concentrations does not have a health benchmark because it's considered biologically inert at these low concentrations, but can be hazardous at very high levels. This map that you're looking at shows you where we monitored with the GMAP. I want to pause to point out that the direction north is, if you're thinking of a face of a clock, it's pointing at 11 o'clock. This map is shown horizontally just so you can see better the areas that we were able to travel when we were out with a mobile monitor. So here the mobile monitoring path driven in the Detroit community downwind of the Stellantis plant is depicted by the blue lines. The Stellantis, the Mack assembly, and the Jefferson North plants are depicted by the arrows. And you'll see the path that was driven covers Shoemaker Street to the north, Warren Street as far as Garland Street to the west, Jefferson Street south, and Mack Avenue as far as Gray Streets to the east. Wind conditions were again favorable for monitoring over these 2 days, blowing over the facility. And again, only levels of methane were detected above reporting limits. EPA also collected 10 canisters that were analyzed by the EGLE laboratory. Some of these canisters were taken when staff that was running the mobile monitor were observing odors. And here you'll see the location of the canisters represented by these yellow stars. Low levels above the reporting limit were identified for 9 compounds. All of these reported levels were well below health thresholds. Over the 2 days of this monitoring campaign, odors were observed by the EPA field staff each day near Stellantis. Although a distinct odor was observed, EPA did not detect reportable concentrations of hydrogen sulfide, benzene, toluene, or p-xylene using the mobile monitor during this campaign. Methane again was detected at background levels. The canister analysis measured for additional volatile organic compounds that could be a concern and could be leading to odors. These additional canister samples taken during the odor events and sent to the Michigan EGLE laboratory identified 9 compounds. Of these 9 compounds, all concentrations were below levels of health concern. Even though these compounds were below levels of concern at the time of the sampling, some of these compounds are consistent with painting and degreasing processes and may be contributing to the observed odors. In August of 2021, limited sampling near Stellantis was conducted as part of another EPA project. Based on preliminarily validated data, no elevated concentrations were observed from the facility during this project. EPA has been working with and will continue to support EGLE and MDHHS in addressing any concerns around Stellantis.
All right, thanks a lot, Marta. We did have a few questions that I think can kind of help explain some of the other things or give a little bit of clarity to what you were talking about. So there is one question that said, why would we expect pollutants in the late evening hours, or why is that a good time to sample?
Sure, that's a great question. So some pollutants, such as hydrogen sulfide, are heavier than air. And so these pollutants will start to settle, and they will stick around at times when, in the early morning and the late evening, when the wind conditions are still. And so if you have wind conditions that are blowing, that are fast, that'll dissipate any of those pollutants. And so when we're looking for pollutants that are heavier than air, we want to go out at times when we expect for the conditions outside to be most favorable, where those pollutants won't be dispersed.
So essentially, you're trying to look for a worst case scenario and trying the best that we can to identify what was found, especially when we're experiencing odors too. And I know you had mentioned that you had staff in the mobile monitor that had experienced odors, and that's why those samples particularly were taken in those starred locations. So I know that's the point of it. It's like, well, here we're smelling that it smells bad too. We want to make sure we're capturing this because this could be what community is experiencing at their properties and their yards. So sometimes I think what happens with that kind of monitoring is, you're looking at, one of the questioners asked, what kind of a radius are we looking at here, or how far away did people experience odors? And I haven't seen those complaints necessarily mapped, but I think that the map that Marta showed that shows where that mobile monitor went definitely goes all the way around the facility. So, but just on the days when they were monitoring, the wind happened to be in a direction where the odors were on that side of the facility. So if they had been on the other side, they would have taken those same kind of samples. So working a little bit within weather conditions on the days that they could go out. Another question that folks had was, did we call Stellantis and let them know that we were going to be doing this mobile monitoring? So I don't know if you can answer that question or not, Marta.
I think I'll let Michigan Enforcement take that question.
Okay, I don't know, Bob, do you know if we gave a heads up to Stellantis that we're doing the mobile monitoring? My recollection is that we did not, but I don't want to misspeak on that.
I don't believe we did let Stellantis know that. There were a couple of facilities where we needed specific access to that we may have had to notify a company, but because the van this particular time did not go on site, I believe, they probably did not know ahead of time.
Yeah, we try the best we can in these kinds of cases, especially when it's an enforcement case or we're getting complaints about odors, to not give a heads up because we want the company to be acting just like they normally would in these situations, processing whatever they're doing. So in this case, doing car assembly, doing painting, doing everything that they would normally be doing, so that we can really determine that worst case, so that we can verify what community is experiencing. And that's a really important kind of part of this investigation, is getting, not having there be any change in status for the facility. So you guys are giving me some great questions to ask folks. So I might not get to all of them right now. I know I'm trying to kind of conglomerate them so that we can get kind of those main things focused on. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Brandon. But one of the questions that came in was a question about, you said there's no health effects. So what we were talking about is that there was no immediate health effects. So nothing that would cause community to have to take immediate action to evacuate or something like that. But we definitely found things. Marta talked a little bit about some of the compounds that were found in the sampling that EPA did. And Brandon's going to talk about what the findings were of the Department of Health and Human Services sampling. So we definitely had some findings. We just recently got the rest of those today. Some of those, the stuff that Marta just talked about is actually posted on that website, that michigan.gov/EGLE Stellantis website. I think Brandon's going to talk a little bit about the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services plans to share their data broadly so that folks can review that as well. But this should at least give you a really, a nice overview of where things are right now. So Brandon, if you want to go ahead, whenever you're ready, your presentation looks good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. I wanted to thank you all for attending this meeting. My name is Brandon Reed. I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, or MDHHS. And like Jennifer said, I'll be giving an update on MDHHS's actions and evaluations related to the Stellantis Detroit Assembly Complex. So just as a heads up, this presentation is going to be a bit longer than the others. So I did want to give a brief overview of our takeaway points, kind of our big ideas before I get into the details. Be respectful of all of your time. So we at MDHHS have reviewed air sampling data for the community surrounding the Stellantis Detroit Assembly Complex, also known as the Mack assembly plant, to see if there are any chemicals in the air that could cause health impacts. This is based on many odor complaints that have been submitted by nearby residents, as well as reports of odors by EGLE investigators and EPA scientists, and health concerns from nearby residents as well. After reviewing the air sampling data, we did not find any short-term or long-term health risks. So in other words, the levels of chemicals from the data were not high enough to cause an increased risk of health effects. But I do want to note that the data that we have here is pretty limited. And we do also want to address that foul odors, like the ones reported by residents near Stellantis, are a nuisance, and they can cause temporary health symptoms that worsen quality of life, like headaches and nausea and irritation, whether respiratory, irritating your lungs, or irritating your eyes, or even your throat. Therefore, MDHHS will continue to review any new air sampling data, and we will continue to work with our partners at EGLE, EPA, and the ATSDR to protect the health and quality of life of communities near the Stellantis facilities. So first off, why are we investigating the air quality near Stellantis? So we've heard that many residents who live near Stellantis have reported foul odors and health symptoms in their community since Stellantis started operating new equipment at their Mack assembly plant in March 2021. We also know that Stellantis is located in a residential area. It's surrounded by several fence line communities. These are communities that are located near the fence lines of industrial plants and factories. And these communities are often the most impacted by the noise, the odors, and the chemical emissions that result from industrial operations. MDHHS is responsible for protecting public health, and one of the ways that public health can be harmed is through air pollutants. So when we find out about a community that could have had higher levels of air pollutants, we review that data to see if the levels could cause health risk. Next, I want to talk about foul odors and health, since so many residents near Stellantis have reported foul odors and are concerned about health effects. So just as a brief introduction, odors are caused by substances in the air, like chemicals, that have a scent. If the odor is unpleasant, then smelling the odor can worsen your quality of life and cause temporary health symptoms like headaches, nausea, and irritation. Most of these symptoms will go away, however, when the odor is gone. While environmental odors are a nuisance and unacceptable, they do not cause chronic or long-lasting health effects. And this is different from chemicals that we call toxic, which can cause health harms that are more severe or longer lasting. These are the chemicals that we are most worried about at MDHHS, though we are also concerned about chemicals that can cause odors. While odors can cause nuisances and health symptoms, it is important to remember that smelling an odor does not necessarily mean that your health is being harmed, certainly not long-term. And our primary role at MDHHS is to find out whether any air pollutants near the Stellantis Mack plant could increase the risk of long-lasting health effects. Next, I'm going to talk about how we review air data to assess or evaluate health risks. Our first step in this process is to compile all the air monitoring data for a community. We want our review to be as thorough as possible, and that means that getting all of the data that's available. We try to sample during conditions that would result in the highest measured chemicals, or what had been mentioned before as a worst case scenario. Since levels of chemicals in the air can vary, we try to measure when the chemicals are highest. Then once we have that data, we can compare the levels of chemicals in the samples against what we call health risk comparison values, or CVs. These values are levels of chemicals in the air that could cause adverse health effects. CVs are set by agencies like ATSDR, EPA, and EGLE, and are protective of everyone, even those who are particularly sensitive to chemicals, like people with pre-existing conditions and children. So in summary, health risk comparison values are designed to be protective for everyone, even sensitive populations, and they're based on the best available science. Next, I'm going to talk about what data has been collected. This is a pretty big table. There's a lot going on here, but I'm going to talk about every study in the table more in depth. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, just to give you all an introduction about what data I'm going to be talking about. So we do have some data from Stellantis. They have a continuous air pollutant monitor that has collected information on particulate matter and nitrogen oxides. They've also collected periodic air samples using air canisters like the ones that EPA used from January 2021 to the present day. And those air samples measure for volatile organic compounds. EGLE has also conducted a brief air quality study in Southeast Detroit in May to June of 2021 called the Michigan-Ontario Ozone Source Experiment, shortened to MOOSE, where they used a drone to monitor chemical levels near potential industry sources. So that also focused on the volatile organic compounds. EPA's GMAP study, you just heard about, Marta talked about that, but that was another study that looked at volatile organic compounds as well as hydrogen sulfide. And lastly, MDHHS conducted 2 sampling events, one in November and another in December of 2021, where we collected over 75 samples to look at levels of particularly volatile organic compounds. The focus of this sampling was to measure specific chemicals that were used at Stellantis, which we identified by reviewing the compositions of products used at Stellantis. So we got all of the compositions of the products that they use. We reviewed all of those, and based on the compositions we got, we identified chemicals that we could monitor for in the air to see if we could see any of those in the air surrounding Stellantis. So next I have a map on screen. This is the same map that Marta showed you earlier with the track showing where the GMAP was driving. But this map is a composite sample that EPA also prepared for us that shows where all of the air samples have been collected that we used. Again, the map has been angled, so north is actually up in the upper left corner. I have my mouse up here. Hopefully that can, my cursor up here, hopefully that can be seen, but north is in this direction. But again, this shows all the sampling that we have. The Stellantis Mack assembly plant is located towards the center to the left, and the Stellantis Jefferson North plant is located to the right of the plant. And then all of these pins here that have different colors show where samples have been taken. The red pins show where the US EPA took samples on their air canisters. The yellow pins show where MDHHS collected samples. And the blue samples show other locations where MDHHS collected samples. But as you can see from the map, the majority of the samples that were taken that went into our analysis came from the community. A lot of these were taken right along Beneteau Street, which is right just below the Stellantis Mack assembly plant, where my cursor is right now. Some of these came from the Beneteau community further south, closer to the Jefferson North plant. And a couple were taken on the other side of the Mack assembly plant to the east of the Mack assembly plant. Next, I'm going to talk in depth about the data that has been collected so far, starting with Stellantis' monitoring and sampling. They installed an ambient air quality monitoring station at the Mack plant that's located right where that star is on the map right there. That's where their ambient air quality monitoring station is. That again monitors.
Hey, Brandon, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is one of those words that we throw out there that is sometimes hard for people because they don't use it in their normal everyday life. But when you say ambient air monitor, you are talking about an air monitor that's measuring the outdoor air. So typically in the breathing zone, when we say ambient air, that's what we're talking about. So
yes,
I just wanted to clarify. I apologize for butting in.
No, absolutely not. Thank you, Jen, for clarifying. Yeah, and just to clarify, all of the sampling that has been done that went into this is all outdoor community air sampling. We did not take any samples from indoor air. All of it is outdoors in the community. But that station monitors, again, nitrogen oxides and particulate matter. These are air pollutants that are regulated through the EPA National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS. Levels of these chemicals were below NAAQS standards from available data from January to September of 2021. But if you'd like to learn more about current levels of air pollutants, you can go to airnow.gov. That website will tell you real-time levels of all of the NAAQS pollutants in your area. So it's a really useful website if you're concerned about air pollution in your community. Okay, next I'm going to talk about Stellantis's air canister sampling. So this is, like I said, very similar to the sampling that EPA conducted with their canisters when they smelled odors on the GMAP. I've got a table here on the right that shows all of the chemicals that were detected from that monitoring, as well as all of the results with a range from the lowest to the highest detected result. And then I have our comparison values, our health risk comparison values on the right. So there's a lot going on in this table. I'm not going to go through, point by point. I'm going to give the big ideas, but this information is here for anyone who wants to go back. We'll post these slides, so anyone who wants to go back and look what we have here, you are welcome to do so. And again, if you have any questions, please contact me. I can explain anything here. But the comparison values, I did want to mention about those. These were selected to be the most protective of health. There's a lot of different comparison values that you can select for chemicals. But the ones that we selected were the most protective. Most of these are protective of long-term exposures or exposures lasting more than 1 year, in addition to short-term exposures to those chemicals. Another couple things to note in the table: whenever the chemicals are bolded, that means that they're known to be used at the Stellantis Mack plant. That was a result of the analysis that we did, where we looked at the different products that they use at the Stellantis Mack plant and identified the chemicals that we know that they use there. So as you can see, several chemicals that were detected in the air were known to be used at the Stellantis Mack plant. That includes acetone, ethyl acetate, M&P xylene or xylenes, and methyl ethyl ketone and toluene. But all of the chemicals that were detected in these samples were measured below their applicable health risk comparison values. One other note I did want to make, the ND in the table, that means non-detect, that means that the chemical was not detected. And lastly, the chemicals listed in the table are not the only chemicals that we tested for. So the method that was used here tests for, I think, close to 100 chemicals. We only list the chemicals that were detected, and if they aren't listed here, it means that they were not detected in any of the samples that were taken. Okay, next I'm going to talk about EGLE's Detroit Air Quality Study. Again, this was conducted in Southeast Michigan from May to June of 2021 to try to map levels of VOCs near our volatile organic compounds near several industrial plants, including the Stellantis Mack plant. None of the chemicals that were measured in this study were measured above their health risk comparison values. However, several VOCs were measured at higher levels near the Stellantis Mack plant compared to the surrounding areas. And 3 of these chemicals, ethylbenzene, toluene, and xylenes, are known to be used at the Stellantis Mack plant. I'll have the maps on the next slide, but I did want to note that EGLE is considering further drone analysis and air sampling near the plant in the future. So next, I've got the results from that air quality study. These maps are a little hard to interpret, but I kind of want to explain those the best I can. So I've got an arrow pointing to the location of the Stellantis Mack assembly plant, and these different colorations on the screen show levels of concentrations of the different chemicals. Blue is pretty low, and yellow or red means that it's elevated. So as you can see for benzene, toluene, and xylenes and ethylbenzene, that square next to the Stellantis Mack assembly plant is elevated compared to the surrounding areas. So this data is helpful to show that emissions near the Stellantis Mack plant to show that it's a potential source of those chemicals. But an important limitation is that the chemicals that were measured here were not measured at breathing level. They were measured above the plant. So it's not representative of the levels that community members would be exposed to walking around the neighborhood. And then I did want to note there were several other pollutants that were measured, and I've included the maps for those pollutants at the end of these slides. So you can check those out once the slides are posted. Next, just a quick review on the EPA Monitoring and Sampling Study. As previously mentioned, EPA sampled the community surrounding the Stellantis facilities on November 16th and 17th, 2021, using their GMAT mobile monitor. Again, that vehicle monitors for the air pollutants, hydrogen sulfide, methane, benzene, toluene, and xylene. And no air pollutants were measured above reportable limits from that monitoring other than methane. Next, I'm going to talk about the results from the air canister samples. These are included in the table to the right. It's set up exactly the same way as the last table I showed you from Stellantis's sampling results. And as you can see, 1,2,4 trimethylbenzene, M&P xylene, O-xylene, and toluene were all detected, and those are known to be used at the Stellantis Mack plant. However, all the chemicals detected in these samples were also detected below their health risk comparison values. And another reminder that the chemicals listed in this table are not the only chemicals that were tested for. There's a whole list of chemicals that were not detected here, and we're just showing the ones that had detections. Next, I'm going to talk about MDHHS's monitoring and sampling. The first round of that was completed on November 22nd. We conducted air monitoring of hydrogen sulfide, which is an odorous chemical, as well as total VOCs in the community. Hydrogen sulfide levels, we found up to 3 parts per billion, and total VOC levels, or volatile organic compound levels, ranged from 101 to 200 parts per billion. The VOC levels there are consistent with what you would see in background levels of total VOCs in urban areas. And then we have the results for the hydrogen sulfide readings, as well as the results from our canister sampling in the table to the right. You can see it, just a few chemicals were detected here, Acetone is one that we know is used at Stellantis, but that was the only one that was measured. Again, not just hydrogen sulfide, but all the chemicals measured were below their health risk comparison values. Another reminder that these are not the only chemicals that were tested. There are a lot of other chemicals that were tested for and that were not detected. Okay, last wordy sciencey slide here, hopefully. So this is our second round of sampling that we did. MDHHS completed on December 8th and 17th. We conducted extended air sampling. And the goals of this second round of sampling was to collect air samples on days with different wind conditions. We wanted to see if wind conditions would affect chemical levels, particularly when the wind is blowing in the direction of the Beneteau community and when it's blowing away. So it was good that we got 2 days where the wind conditions were opposite. We had winds out of the west one day and winds out of the east another day. So it was really good to get that. And another goal of that sampling was to collect samples using new sampling technologies. And these can measure different chemicals than all of the canister samples that we've been talking about. So all those canisters have the same chemicals that they detect for every time. And these new sampling technologies can measure some different chemicals, including some that we know to be used at the Stellantis Mack plant that can't be measured by the others. So that was really helpful for us to be able to look at an expanded list of chemicals that could potentially be causing health effects and could potentially be causing odors. And the results of that table, or the results of that study, are in the table to the right. We have the results sorted out by the date of the collection, so the 8th and then the 17th. The bolded chemicals again, acetone, xylene, and toluene were detected, and those are known to be used at the Stellantis Mack plant. But again, all detected chemicals were below their health risk comparison values here as well. Next, I want to talk about specifically what we did to analyze odors and analyze the different levels of chemicals and to determine, if these could be potentially causing the odors that people have been smelling that have been affecting people in the community. So first of all, what is an odor threshold? Odor thresholds are what we call estimates of chemicals, levels of chemicals in the air that can be detected by their scent. Odor thresholds are usually set based on studies. There's usually a process to them, and they're not perfect. They're not set in stone, but they represent a pretty good estimate or guide as to how much of a chemical there needs to be for it to be set. And we did our best to find odor thresholds for all the chemicals that were detected, but none of the chemicals that we detected and measured exceeded any of their known odor thresholds. I do want to qualify this with a lot of limitations here. So the first limitation being that some chemicals do not have odor thresholds. Remember, these are levels that come from studies. So some chemicals that were detected just did not have scientific studies completed to find out an odor threshold. We just couldn't find any information about, is this chemical odorous, and what levels can it cause odors. Second important limitation is that some people are particularly sensitive to odors and may also be able to detect odors below known thresholds. So everyone's sensitivity to odors is different. Some people are particularly sensitive. Some people are not as sensitive. So there are some people who certainly could be able to detect odors that are below what we would consider an established odor threshold. Also, methods used in air sampling can only measure certain chemicals. Even though we did expand our list of chemicals that we can sample for, a lot of these are still going to be missed because we only have it's only a specific list of chemicals. So any chemicals not in those lists are not going to show up on the results there. And lastly, our sampling and monitoring is never fully representative of the ambient air. Sampling is only ever a snapshot in time. We do our best to be there when we think the levels are going to be highest, when we think there's going to be a worst case scenario. But at the end of the day, if the odor wasn't present at the time that the sampling was complete, then it's unfortunately not going to be caught. So a lot of important limitations there that I did want to make clear. So to summarize our conclusions, we found around 20 unique chemicals that were detected from samples in the community near the Stellantis Mack plant. Of those 20 chemicals, 8 are known to be used at the Stellantis Mack plant based on our review of products that Stellantis uses during their operations. All the detected chemicals were below their health risk comparison values. This means that based on the data we have, the levels of chemicals were not high enough to cause an increased risk of health impacts. But I do want to clarify that this data is limited and our sampling represents a snapshot in time and our best efforts to estimate the true levels of chemicals in the community. We know that chemical levels can vary daily and they can vary seasonally. They may be higher at certain times of the year and lower at certain times of the year as well. So our conclusions are only based on the data that we have right now. A couple other conclusions focused on the odor nuisances. We also have not identified the chemicals or substances responsible for the odors that have been bothering people who live near Stellantis. None of the chemicals that were detected in the air sampling data were at levels above known odor thresholds or levels that you can smell. However, importantly, this does not mean that there are no odor nuisances in the community near Stellantis. It just means that we were not able to find the substances causing the odors based on the limited sampling information that we have. And I also want to reiterate that while odor nuisances do not cause chronic or long-lasting health impacts, we at MDHHS still take them very seriously. They are not acceptable, and they do worsen quality of life, cause adverse health symptoms like headaches, nausea, and respiratory irritations. So we do take them very seriously. Last, I want to talk about our next steps and future actions. First, we'll be reviewing any future sampling results for health risk and determine whether more samples should be collected. EGLE is currently working with Stellantis to conduct additional sampling. They're reviewing their odor monitoring plan. If any additional sampling results from that, we will be reviewing that data when it comes in. We'll also continue evaluating odor complaint reports to inform our future actions. We strongly encourage you to continue submitting reports about odor complaints. They really help us to figure out which areas of Stellantis are being most impacted by odors and where we can focus our future actions. We will create a webpage for our Stellantis investigation where we will post our full data reports so you can see exactly the same lab reports that we got when we built and put together all this information, as well as our evaluations. And finally, we'll complete a health consultation to share with the public, which will discuss our actions, our data review, our conclusions, and our recommendations in much greater detail. I've also included a slide here with some additional resources. This includes the number to report an odor nuisance. That number is for the EGLE Detroit District Office. I'll read that off. It's 313-456-4700. I also have links here for the EGLE webpage on Stellantis facilities, the CDC Environmental Odor Search, ATSDR's Environmental Odors Frequently Asked Questions, and a fact sheet that ATSDR put together on environmental odors. And I did want to note the additional resources and the extra content at the end of the slides, the additional maps from EGLE's air quality study, full results from monitoring during our November 22nd study, and lists of all the chemicals that can be detected in our community samples. So all of those will be available when they're posted online after the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. I really hope that this presentation was helpful and answered some of your questions, but please do not hesitate to contact me with any questions or concerns. Again, my name is Brandon Reed. I'm a toxicologist with MDHHS, and my email address is reidb1@michigan.gov. That's REIDB1@michigan.gov. Thank you all so much. Back to you,
Thank
Jen.
you, Brandon. Yeah, and you might as well stay on. I've got a couple clarifying questions that I think are pretty important for you to address first, and then we'll kind of go back and invite some of our other panelists to answer some other questions. But a couple of people asked this, so I'm going to sort of paraphrase it. A few people asked, when you guys are determining at what levels a health impact could occur, and you're doing that evaluation, it's really important to talk about what kind of people are you talking about. Are you talking about someone maybe like me that doesn't have necessarily underlying health conditions, it doesn't have asthma, things like that? Are we talking about those most sensitive groups, infants, the elderly, people with those underlying conditions? What are you really, I know you talked about it a little bit, but if you can just clarify what we're looking at here, because obviously, as you acknowledge, people have different sensitivities to chemicals, people have different sensitivities to odors. I greatly appreciate that you've acknowledged that we call them nuisance odors, and it's probably not a fair thing because they are more than a nuisance to a lot of people when we're talking about actual reactions that folks are having with headaches and, dry eyes and things like that. Those are health reactions. So I appreciate that you acknowledge that so readily. But if you can just kind of talk about, what kind of people are we talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're great questions. So the way that health comparison values are set is that they want to look for the absolute most sensitive effects that could come from exposure to a chemical. So they look at, what is the effect that could come from the absolute least amount of exposure, the most sensitive, we call it the critical effect, but it's what is the lowest amount of exposure that could cause an adverse health effect, any kind of health impact. And that is the effect that is used to create the levels that we use that are called health risk comparison values that assess your risk for having any kind of a harmful health effect. So they are intended to be protective of everybody. That's every sensitive population that you could think of, whether that's someone with pre-existing conditions, whether that's someone who's elderly, someone who is very young, children, infants, whether that's people who are pregnant. Everybody is included in that. Everyone is included in who's protected by the health comparison values.
So sort of a follow-up question to that, and I thought that's how you were going to answer, but I didn't want to put words in your mouth because I wanted to make sure I was remembering correctly that we had talked about this. But another really interesting question related to this work and all the sampling that we did and the findings of the chemicals that were detected is the first question, I guess, the folks had is there an ability or are we worried about potentially these chemicals in the air accumulating in the body in some way? Is that something that is looked at, or is that a concern that folks should have over maybe more of a long-term basis?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an important concern too. That's why a lot of the health comparison values that we used were also protective of long-term exposure, like you mentioned, because we know that the sampling that we did was very short term. We were only taking samples for a couple minutes or for 24 hours, and those are helpful, and those can inform a lot of what we do. But it is important that when we look at these chemicals, we're not just considering these something that happened for a couple days then they're gone. We always want to assume the worst case and hope for the best. So whenever we make our conclusions, we want to make sure that we look at, okay, if these are levels that are going on, these are exposures that continue to happen, these emissions continue to happen, and these, let's say hypothetically these do go on for more than a year, or these levels of chemicals are representative and they're going on for multiple years, could health effects happen then? And that's why we used a lot of those levels that would be protective of long term, even if this was a lifetime exposure to this level of a chemical, or 20 years or 30 years of exposure, it would still be protective. So that's a lot of why we chose those more protective values, as just so that we could be extra sure that even if these go on for a while, even hypothetically this goes on for a while, then it would still be protective.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity. I appreciate that. I'm going to ask you at least one more and maybe another one, and then I'll give you a little break to get a drink of water or something. But this is another really good point that comes up often, and it's sometimes a hard one to answer. And so I think that you might be able to offer some clarity on this as well. So with all the samples that we took and the chemicals that we did find, were any of these looked at cumulatively? So I know that in air quality division, when we do permitting, we do have some groups of chemicals that we can sort of look at from a cumulative impact basis. Not all of them, it's definitely not all encompassing, but we do have a limited number that we can do that with. Was that considered in this evaluation? Can it be considered? Is that even possible?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a good question. It's a good comparison with what EGLE does. And the way that we kind of look at cumulative exposure is we consider exposures to be averaged over a certain amount of time. So if we're looking at short-term exposures, for example, we're going to think about acute or short-term as being averaged over a short amount of time, like 1 to 15 days. We'll think about the total exposure over 15 days. We'll average it out and then see what it looks like. For the more long-term, then we look at exposures that are averaged over a year. So we think about, okay, what's your total exposure over a year? Now, let's say you have hypothetically a very high exposure to a chemical that's very, very high, but it's just for one day, and then you're not exposed again for a whole year. If you average that out over the whole year, then that level is not going to be as much because you've had 364 other days where you weren't exposed. But if that's a chemical that has an acute effect, let's say that's something that may not have really long-term effects, but if you're exposed to a lot of it in a very short amount of time, then that can have really bad effects that you wouldn't get from low exposure. So that's also something that we have to consider, is we have to look at some of those chemicals too and see, is this something that is going to cause effects at low levels over a long time, or is it going to be something that's going to cause effects from high levels over a short time? And I'm not sure if that answered the question. I hope it did.
I mean, I think a little bit. I'm sure we would all love to be able to give a different answer than that, to say collective, we can look at all of these things, as a whole and tell and be able to determine how they could affect our bodies. Unfortunately, we just have some limitations on that. So I appreciate you kind of talking through those. I am going to ask you one other question before I let you go. Now I'm not letting you go. You can't get off the meeting. You got to stay on because I'm going to have some more for you, I think. But
I'll be here.
One of the questions was, when we're looking at the health values that you guys use, there was a question on, how often are those updated? Is it something that's done collectively? I know. So again, I just want to parallel this a little bit with some of the stuff that we do in air quality division. So we also regulate toxic air contaminants, and we do update those frequently, but we have, over 1,200 different ones. So we don't go all 1,200 we're going to look at right now. We kind of do them over time. And when we get new information, we make sure to look at that and ensure that those values that we have, those levels, are still adequate. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about the process for that, if you have information that you could share.
Yeah. And it's very similar to like what you said. It kind of just depends on the new data coming in. We use a lot of different health comparison values. I know I didn't leave the tables up on there. I didn't read through all of those different levels there. When we post it, I will have a slide that is included in the presentation that tells you exactly what each, the agency that sets the level, what it's protective of, the duration of time that it's protective for. That'll all be in there. But yeah, it kind of depends on the agency that sets it. So ATSDR may have different processes than EPA. And we also used some that were set by EGLE. We also used some that were set by, a joint EGLE and MDHHS group. So it depends, but in general, it's as the new data comes in, as there is new data that comes in that, may show a different effect. It may show, hey, we didn't look for this effect in previous studies. We didn't look for, effects on the liver in the previous studies. And now this study comes up that shows liver effects. We need to look at this. We need to update our values. So it's as the data comes in, but I would need to look up, specifically ATSDR versus EGLE versus EPA to get an exact answer on how frequently those are updated.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarity. I do appreciate it. I know it's, kind of a weird thing, and it's definitely, they've been developed over time, so that's going to happen. There's a couple comments, and these are more comments / questions. I'm going to give you a break for a second, Brandon, so we'll get to some other things. Sure. Comments / questions in the question box. So I appreciate this. And maybe that was my fault for not necessarily sort of setting the stage, I guess, when we first got started talking today. So we're anticipating that this meeting is the first meeting, not necessarily the last meeting or the only meeting that we're going to be sharing information with the community. So I know people are frustrated because we don't have all the answers tonight, and I apologize for that. I think when we were going ahead and getting ready to plan this, we wanted to share at least what we knew at the time so that it wasn't something where all this sampling and all these things were going on and folks didn't know what any of the results were. So I understand the frustration with not having all the answers tonight. I appreciate people, letting me know that you're frustrated, because we definitely hear that. I know that as we go through, as you probably heard Brandon talk about a little bit, and even Marta and Bob talk about a little bit, we are planning on more sampling. So we're working on plans for that. Again, as in all these cases, we want to make sure that we're looking for when is the worst case scenario going to be in. And that maybe sounds a little bit bad, but we want to look at when can we really find the most things that might be out there that may be potentially impacting community. So we want to put our samples in the places where we feel are going to be the most impacted. Depending on the weather that day, we want to be looking for the most amount of chemicals that we possibly can with all the criteria and the methodology we have available. Somebody asked if our methods were a secret. No, they're not a secret. We're definitely using EPA approved methodologies right now to look for these different kinds of chemicals. Brandon also emphasized that MDHHS did a thorough review of the safety data sheets that were available for Stellantis to try to parallel what are we finding in the air, and is that something that Stellantis is using in their process, because that connection is really important when we're trying to figure out what's the best sampling that we can do. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much for voicing your frustrations about us not having all the answers. I think I just want to reiterate one more time that Brandon's conversation with folks about the health effects, short-term and long-term health effects potential that we're looking at are only based on that knowledge that we have right now. We don't want to discount in any way, shape, or form that folks are having some effects, especially from odors that they're experiencing. Part of this study is to see if the odors that we're experiencing, are they going to be causing these more immediate short-term and long-term health effects? So I understand that there's definitely more work to do. Like I said, we are planning more sampling in the future, which we will definitely be talking about with all of you as well, if you're still interested. So just wanted to lay that groundwork. I apologize for not setting the table quite right about what this conversation was going to entail tonight, and appreciate folks still staying on. I know it's a little bit after 7. We have some more questions. I have quite a few here, and I want to kind of, I'm lumping some of them together. So I do also want to just give folks, especially on the phone that have called in, an opportunity to raise your hand. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen over yours again here a second, Brandon. And then if we need to share yours back, we can definitely do that, just so that we can get people on here. So I'm going to go ahead and have my panelists turn their cameras on as we get more into this bigger conversation. So again, just want to remind you, you guys are doing a great job of putting your questions in the question box. Really appreciate that. If you are calling in, like I said, I will call on you based on the last 4 digits of your phone number. And if you want to raise your hand for me, you can just click #2 on your phone. So greatly appreciate that. I have someone calling in or with their hand raised. I know you've asked a couple questions as well. But Mr. Shobe, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you a second so you can ask a question. So hold on just a moment. Let me get you going there. All right, we can hear you, I think. So go right ahead whenever you're ready.
Well, my questions are multifaceted. First and foremost.
Okay, can you start with one for us? How about that? And then we'll definitely get to all of them.
The first one is, we're dealing with this after the fact first and foremost. And you guys do a lot of modeling and stuff. So have you done any models as far as to determine what has actually happened over here before you revented the stuff over there, for one? For two, I want to share, because I've talked with your investigators and the health department and all of them, that they make Chrysler aware. And that's one of the things that should not be done when you're doing an air monitoring sample. And the other one is why do they have an air monitoring system on the other end of the plant, on the north end of the plant, when the closest residents to the paint facility are on the west end of the plant? And why are you holding this meeting when you don't have all the information?
Yeah, I heard you on that one, Mr. Shob. I know, and I apologize. I mean, I hope that this is just the first step in sharing this information with you. And I know you're frustrated that we don't have all the answers for you tonight.
Yeah, I'm frustrated.
I know. I hear you on that. I definitely do. And I wish I could give it all to you at once, but hopefully at least this will answer some of the questions that you have. So that, those are really good questions. And I think what I heard you ask about specifically, at least the first question was, did we take the information that we had and reuse that computer simulation is what I think you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, to look at what those emissions, the impacts of those emissions before the ventilation was fixed on the line. Am I clear on the question?
That's a clear question, because
okay,
that's what
perfect.
it appears you guys are doing now. You're modeling. You haven't been out here and done anything to check on the residents.
Okay, so I don't think that we did any specific computer modeling based on not having that controlled. So I can answer at least that question for you. Can you go over what was your second question related to that again? Where the monitor is that Stellantis is operating? Was that the question?
That's a major question. Why would it be on the other end of the plant as opposed to between the closest residents right next to this paint facility?
Right. So that's a great question as well. And I don't know, Bob, if you have any insight that you can kind of talk about the siting of that monitor.
I have
and what went into that.
I just wanted to add, from the original PTI, there was air toxics impacts predicted through a model. The permit engineer and I did go back and revise that model as if that ambient flash zone was not controlled, and all the air toxic screening levels were still met from the original air toxics modeling. So we did evaluate that scenario for the time that ductwork was not properly connected. For the ambient air monitor in the front of the plant that monitors for NOx and PM 2.5, that was, I believe, worked out through the monitoring group within EGLE AQD, and I'm not quite sure of all the details on how that specific location was chosen.
And we can get more information on that too, Mr. Shob, if you don't mind. Definitely get back to you. We have your contact information, so we can chat a little bit more about that later. And them having that monitor there doesn't preclude, other things from happening in the future either. I'm sorry, go ahead.
My thing is it sounds like you guys have been using a lot of that data. And I have information about the sampling, especially the stuff that was done by me, but we don't have to get into that.
Okay, but let's talk about that offline.
Yeah, you guys are using something that's useless for the people over here to make these assessments. And you're already saying that you don't have all the information, but you keep telling people they're safe. And then there's chemicals that you can't even, you can't detect or you don't test for, but you're telling people they're safe. That doesn't make common sense. I'm no scientist, but that doesn't make common sense.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying on that. I think that's definitely part of this conversation is, just reiterating that this is based on what we know, and there's definitely things that we don't know at this point. And I don't want to cut you off, but I definitely want to get to some other folks that have their hands raised. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, I'll just leave one more thing out there.
Okay,
so
sure.
We keep smelling this until we die then.
Well, hopefully not. I mean, keep calling us. I know that's frustrating you as well. And I know you've been talking to staff. And again, I can't say this enough that we appreciate you guys calling. It's never a burden. We want to hear from you. When you're experiencing odors and they're affecting your life, please, please, please let us know. It is actually really, really helpful. And I was an inspector for a long time on the other side of the state. And that was something I always would tell people is like, please let me know when you're having these experiences, because I can't keep working on it for you if I don't know. So thank you for reiterating that. Hopefully everybody else heard you say that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to somebody else, but thanks again for participating tonight and always being an advocate for your community there. All right, Eden, I know you had a couple questions, so I am going to unmute you. Should be able to unmute if you go ahead and try it if you can.
Can you hear me?
Yep, definitely. All right, thanks. Sorry, sometimes I think, is it a delay or what's going on with my click finger? So go right ahead with your question.
Oh, okay, where to begin? So, you know, it's amazing. I come fairly clear-headed to these things, and you all never fail to frustrate me to the point of confusion. So I'm extremely upset. I'm very confused by the fact that it seems like there's been an entire caveat to this conversation, which is that there's not enough data to determine what you've spent the past hour talking about. And as a resident here and as someone who's been through many of these conversations with you all and been raising this concern since day one, I'm extremely frustrated by this. I'm also, I would like to understand how it's okay for you all to kind of underscore or sign off on Stellantis' statements that there are no health risks when you've all stated that there's not data to do that. I guess that's my question. I'd really like to hear from EGLE on that. I'd like to hear from the EPA on that. And I'd like to hear from DHHS on that. And that is, you know, do you underscore support Stellantis' statements that they've made publicly to the media and that are very, very detrimental to the psychology and, you know, the way that this project is impacting the residents here. We're smelling the stuff, it's real, but you don't seem to be concerned about the health impacts. You seem to be focusing on the smell and not the fact that eyes are burning, that throats are sore, that lungs are sore. But my main thing is I'd really like to get a statement about Stellantis' health statements from the EPA, from EGLE, and from DHHS. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Eden. I appreciate you bringing that up. So from an EGLE standpoint, there's not been, you know, we have never signed off on a statement that Stellantis made. I just want to be clear on that. That's why we're having this meeting, is to try to inform you all of what we do know. So that being said, we have never signed off, quote, on a statement that Stellantis has made. I don't know, Brandon, if you have something to add from a DHHS perspective on that, but I certainly think that all things are sort of still on the table as far as that goes for EGLE.
Well, could you check them on it?
Yeah, and I agree with exactly what you said, Jennifer, which is that, you know, we've never signed on to anything like that. We've never taken Stellantis' word for anything. The data that we were working with, we acknowledged was limited. The data that Stellantis used to make that assessment, that assertion, and that's why we went in and conducted more modeling. That's why we did, you know, 2 different sampling events to try to find more information, because we were not satisfied by the data that was there to make any kinds of those conclusions. And we know we do want to reiterate that, you know, odors are not acceptable. You know, we look at those in addition to the health effects, just to say that, you know, we're covering all of our bases. You know, we want to look at the health effects; those are important to us. You know, those are very serious. We also do want to look at the odors and see, you know, what's causing this. Because even if there are no health effects, even if we're looking at these and we're saying, well, hey, all of the levels are below health comparison values, if there are still odors in the community, then, you know, that's not acceptable, even if it's not showing up on what the data that we're getting. And we want to be mindful about that. We want to make sure that that's a focus of ours.
Marta, I don't know if you can speak to EPA's perspective at all.
I can speak to EPA's perspective, and that's the EPA is here to support EGLE and DHHS's. You're working together to try to identify and get to the bottom of these concerns.
All right, thank you for that. So Eden, I know that's probably not going to be the most satisfactory answer for you. And again, I do apologize. But I will just say again that, EGLE has not signed off on any statements that Stellantis has made at this point in that regard. I'm going to get to one more question, one more hand raised, and then I'm going to go back to some of our questions that are in the chat. Edith Ford, I think I pronounced your first name right. I apologize if I didn't. So please let us know your name if you would like to, and then you can go ahead. You should be able to unmute and ask your question. I'm trying one more time just to see if you can unmute your line there. Should be unmuted if you want to try to talk. All right, and I apologize that there's sometimes as much technology as we have, sometimes it just does not cooperate for us. So I know I have seen you putting some questions in the chat, so I appreciate that. And I apologize that my unmuting is not working for you. I'm going to go to Katie Andreski. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you would like to ask a question.
Hi, yes. I've been a teacher at the Capuchin Soup Kitchen on Connor, which is east of the facility, for over 10 years. And this past summer, a student of mine had an asthma attack in the garden. Odors were present that day, and I'm concerned about my students' health because we work outside and in the garden, and it's right across the street from Stellantis. And a lot of times the wind is blowing in that direction. So I have two questions for you. Can you guys let me know, can EGLE and MDHH let me know if you think it's safe for me to have classes outside in a garden when odors are like that? Can I tell my students honestly that it's safe for them to be in the garden and in the garden class? And also, should I be concerned about the VOCs or other toxins settling into our garden soil? Thank you.
Thanks, KT. I appreciate that. Brandon, I'm going to let you address those couple questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, I can certainly start with the VOC question. So the VOCs, these are volatile organic compounds. They're chemicals that will stay in the air for a little bit, but usually they dissipate pretty quickly. They don't usually stick around too much, certainly in the soil. So I wouldn't be too concerned about those getting into the soil. And, based on what we're seeing with the levels there, I wouldn't be too concerned about the soil. Now about the asthma side of things, that's a really hard question. And I don't think I can make that kind of an assessment right now about, whether you should have classes outdoors or not. That's, the asthma part of things, those can be triggered by odors. And that's one of the concerns we have with the odors. That's why we want to make sure that we're not just limiting our assessment to the chemicals specifically and what they can do to the body. We want to make sure that we're looking at the odors as well. They're a nuisance. They can cause health effects. And like you said, they can cause asthma attacks too. So that's why we're invested in all of those different things. But unfortunately, I can't make that kind of a recommendation right now.
Yeah, thank you for
commenting.
I'm sorry, KT, go ahead.
Sorry, is there going to be a time when you can make that assessment? Because I don't know if we should continue to have classes because of this facility's inability to address their odor and emission violations. Yeah, absolutely. And we're not done yet. I know that may not have been clear, but we're certainly not done. There's sampling going on in the future. We're still looking at every odor complaint that comes in, and that's something that we're not done yet. So certainly we'll be releasing our full report, our full health consultation that will have everything that we talked about today, and it'll have any other data that comes in the near future in that as well. And that's a place certainly where we'll make a conclusion on the likelihood for asthma concerns and how that plays into the how that works with the chemicals that we're seeing, how that could be affected by the chemicals that we're seeing in the air.
All right. So thank you, Brandon. Appreciate that. Again, thank you very much, KT, for asking those questions. Just getting to a couple questions in the chat. There was a question about the phone number that Stellantis had set up for people to call in complaints. So I know I had at least heard that this was a big point of contention for people. So I want to just address that face on. Stellantis does not pass on complaints that are called into that line to EGLE necessarily. They're not required to. We don't have a way to require them to. What we always prefer is that you call us directly. That allows us to get out there as soon as humanly possible to address those odor complaints that you're having or any other concerns that you might have. So it's an option for people if they choose to. That's something that Stellantis set up and something that they chose to do. I will be sharing, again, the Detroit complaint line that goes right to our district office there in Detroit. And you can also call the pollution emergency number as well. I'll be sharing that later on in the presentation. So we recommend that you call one of those. That's going to get you your fastest action from EGLE. So if you are concerned about that, please do that. Again, Stellantis is not required to pass on any complaints to us, and we don't have the ability to make them do that. We have worked with other companies in the past that have automatically forwarded them to us, but we don't have that agreement with Stellantis right now in that. So I just wanted to address that face on for people. We had a lot of questions, and I'm going to kind of chunk them together from the chat about next steps when it comes to enforcement and what we're doing in response to the violations. So I have, and I apologize that I forgot to introduce her originally. I have Janine Camilleri on the line, and she's our enforcement supervisor in Air Quality Division. And although a lot of the negotiations going up to the actual order is confidential right now, she can at least talk a little bit about where we are in the process. When we issue a violation notice, a company has so many days to respond with a plan of action. And so she can talk a little bit about that. So Janine, if you don't mind just introducing yourself and then kind of giving everybody a heads up on where we are with things and what our next steps are in regard to enforcement and fines and things like that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I think I've talked with some of the folks that have asked questions tonight. And I think that I just want everyone to know that if you have further questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me. We have an air quality enforcement webpage that has my contact information on it, where I can answer other questions. We want to make sure you guys are getting your questions answered. Some of the members of the community may be aware of the enforcement process, but I'll just provide just a brief overview. As you met with Bob earlier tonight and probably have seen him out in the community, he's our eyes and ears on the ground. He has, as part of the Detroit District Office, we've issued violation notices to Stellantis, and we started an escalated enforcement action in November. And what that means is essentially that we will be issuing a consent order to the company. And as Bob mentioned before, it will include a penalty, a compliance plan to address the violations that have been alleged, as well as stipulated penalties for future violations. And a supplemental environmental project is also something that can be considered as part of the settlement. It's really critical for us right now to ensure that we hold the company accountable for these past violations. That's why this case was referred so quickly to enforcement. And I think you are aware we've had a couple of enforcement meetings. We continue to meet with the company regularly. This is a top priority for our division. We're working very closely right now on drafting that administrative consent order, and the compliance plan will have all the actions that the company is required to take to prevent future violations, to ensure that nuisance odors are abated and prevented in the future. So we will be bringing that draft consent order back to the community. We'll have information session where we can go over the details, and we'll have a public comment period and a hearing. So there'll be more opportunities, additional information. And just so you know what we're doing right now, we're spending time to draft that compliance plan. It's really important that that plan has enforceable conditions in it to prevent future violations. So Bob was showing a slide earlier that listed some of the controls that are going to be installed at the facility. And I think you are aware the ductwork violations have been fixed, but there are other improvements that will be made to the plant to prevent nuisance odors in the future. So all that detail is going to be in the order. It will be enforceable. And if there are future violations, there'll be stipulated penalties as well. So that's what we're working on right now. I know that enforcement can take some time, so please be patient, and we will be bringing this back to you. We're trying to work on it as fast as we possibly can. And if there are any specific questions, I'm happy to answer those as well.
Thanks, Janine. I think a lot of the questions that you, or a lot of the response that you just gave did answer a lot of the questions that we have. I think one of the things that I wanted to just clarify is when we say stipulated penalties, that what that means. So can you just talk a little bit about what a stipulated penalty is? I mean, it's kind of a word that we don't throw around necessarily every day either.
Sure. Because a consent order is a contract, essentially, we will be identifying the corrective actions that the company will take. And so if there are violations in the future of the consent order, we'll set out an agreement as to, you know, what the stipulated penalties, we call them stipulated penalties. I guess it's just a term of art. We would basically issue another penalty to the company if there are future violations. And that would be laid out also in the order that we'll share with the public for comment. And we'll talk about that at an upcoming information session. So it's for any violations of the order once we've issued it.
So in that being said, I appreciate that you brought up the opportunity for community to be part of that conversation. Just to let you know, to everybody who is in this meeting tonight, anybody who is on our email subscription list or has had interest or participated in any meeting about this Stellantis Detroit assembly complex in the past will be directly notified about those upcoming meetings. So we want to make sure that you guys know we're going to try to share as much as we can, as soon as we can. Enforcement stuff is a little bit wonky, but one of the things that Janine said that I think is also really important is just that this doesn't preclude the company from having future fines. If they don't fix the problems, we hope that we'll be able to have folks in the community like Mr. Schulb letting us know that it's still smelling out there so we can get out there and make sure we're assessing that. So I think that's a really important part of this, and community input on those actions is also really, really valuable for us. There was one question that I don't know, I know you can't give an exact timeline, Janine, but can you talk about, I know you said this is a high priority for our air quality division, but I think it's a high priority for EGLE in general, getting this done. And there isn't like a set schedule that we have to adhere to. There's no rule that says you must complete this by a certain time frame or anything like that, like we have for some of our other things. But can you talk generally about sort of our folks thinking it's going to be years, days, weeks, months, what are we looking at here?
That's a tough question, but I want to highlight something really quick too about the corrective actions. The order is, like I said, it's a legal contract, but the fixes to concerns out at the plant, they can happen, like the ductwork has already been fixed. So there are corrective actions that are going to happen that could happen in the next couple of weeks. So I just want the community to know that improvements at the plant are going to proceed as they have been, and the compliance order will be a way to hold the company to ensuring that if they've already fixed something, they continue to operate in that manner, make sure it's operating properly in the future. So the order in some ways just kind of summarizes some of the actions that have already happened, but there will be additional actions that may happen in the future. So just to make that clear. As far as a timeline, a lot of, like I was saying right now, is us negotiating that compliance plan, looking at the odor minimization plan that the company submitted, and discussing those details. So honestly, I really can't say. I will say though that we want to make sure that we get back to the community. So we'll be having an information session. We'll be having a public hearing. We'll be wanting to build time into the comment period so that people have ample time to get their questions answered. So all that is part of kind of that enforcement timeline. So some of the key points right now, if I had a crystal ball, I'm hoping that we're going to continue. We've already had 3 enforcement meetings, and we're kind of meeting right now almost like at a weekly to 2-week basis. So we're really hopeful that we're going to try to move this through. I don't think it's going to be years by any means. So I'm hoping to get back to the community. I don't know. If I could say, hopefully.
I know you can't. Yeah.
Early summer.
It's tough, but like you said, we're definitely holding.
Or maybe sooner.
Yep. We're holding their feet to the fire on this one, and we're really pushing the talks as fast as we can and those actions as fast as we can. So Janine, thank you for that update. I do appreciate that. And I know that's a kind of a hard thing to get to sometimes. I'm going to go back to hands that are raised. I have one person who's. Oh, Edith, we can hear you now. Thank you, hon. All right, go ahead. If you have a question, you're next in line.
No, this is not Edith. This is Brenda. When you were trying to unmute Edith, you unmuted me. So
I'm so sorry.
Unmuting Edith, but I did put some information regarding if we have any elected officials on the call. Would you guys please let our elected officials or Ms. Donna Givens Davison from our Eastside Community Network please speak tonight?
Yep, thank you for that. And I apologize. It's on my attendee list. It says Edith. So I apologize. And thank you, Brenda, for letting me know that. I really appreciate it. I'm going to get to
the wrong person.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. But thank you for speaking up anyway. I do appreciate that. All right. So I have someone who's put a couple questions in the chat too. So I want to make sure that we get to you, Jerry, if you have a couple questions that you want to have. So Jerry King, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you a minute. And then if you want to, I know you have a lot of questions, but if you could give us one and let's let folks answer it. And then I'll have you do another one too. Okay.
Okay. So greetings, everybody. Jerry King, chairman of the Neighborhood Advisory Council for this expansion, for this FCA expansion. My question is, since this is the launch of a new vehicle, and there were specs as far as for your EGLE permit and specs for the assembly of this plant, how could this plant be leased into production with critical components not connected and during the pre-audit or testing phase that this wasn't? That's why we do audits. That's why we do checks, so we can see things and fix them because they're not functioning as they should be. So how could this happen where we launched this plant and we didn't have this key equipment? And why are we buying new equipment and making capital expenditures because something wasn't connected? It should be laying on the floor, or was it missed completely, not purchased and not installed?
So I don't know that we can answer that question, Jerry. That might be more of a question for the Stellantis folks in general, but Bob might have a little bit of insight on at least because you had mentioned buying new equipment to complete the proper installation of the ductwork there. So Bob, I don't know if you have any insight on that, but Jerry, I know we can't answer a question about, how they got started without having all their equipment attached. That kind of
and a question for EGLE
too.
All right, and a question for EGLE is, what is your process for releasing a plant into production to make sure they met the requirements for the build that is associated with these key components? All right. How did that get brought off, and how did it get passed on and move to that next level?
Okay, yeah, let's hit.
And have you guys done an internal 5 why on why we're in this situation? Because the 5 why will get us to the real root cause.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to have Bob talk a little bit about our process after a permit is issued as far as what the inspector's role is in that. And I'm going to just warn you, Jerry, that it might not satisfy you for sure. We're definitely not going out and doing a mechanical inspection or anything like that before facilities get started. That being said, and Bob, I know you're ready to chat here, but just to mention that we're definitely talking about our process internally when things like this happen, I don't know that we do a quote, a 5 why, but we do, at least go through what our processes are and say, is there something that needs to change here so that this doesn't happen in the future? So it's definitely part of the conversation. But Bob, if you can talk a little bit about the role that you have after a new permit is issued, I appreciate that.
Sure, yeah. So after a permit to install is issued to a company, that basically gives the company an option to install or modify a process. And in this case, it was to build the Mack assembly plant. After the plant is built and operations begin, they're required to notify us within 30 days that things have started up. We don't always generally go out there right away because when things are starting up, production's very slow. They're lucky if they make, several cars a week or a car a day, and they're really practicing their production routine for the first couple of months. Once those operations get up and going, they submit notifications for stack testing. And that particular test this time was the capture efficiency test, how well the booths are capturing VOCs to send to the abatement equipment. It was during that test that we actually observed that the ambient flash zones from the primer booth was not connected properly. And so that's kind of how all that transpired of us discovering that. We haven't really dwelled into the details of why or how come, but we do, we obviously noticed that from our presence and being present at those stack tests. And it was really one of the first opportunities for us to get out there and observe that plan itself. As far as the new additional capital expenditures, those are as a result of their third-party odor study, where they have determined that the opportunity is there to control more of the VOCs and to help mitigate the odors coming from the plant. And so they have agreed to go above and beyond and install a new regenerative thermal oxidizer to control more zones of the paint line. And so that's where that additional capital expenditure is coming from.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. I do want to just clarify a little bit some of the things that Bob said. So I know we do tend to speak in air quality language sometimes. And, when Bob's talking about mitigating the odors and mitigating things like that, we're talking about things that are going to help control, reduce, eliminate odors, reduce VOC emissions to, decrease that. So that's kind of what we're talking about when he's talking about a mitigating and abatement is reducing or destroying things that would be emitted into the air, put out into the air if they didn't have this equipment to drop those levels down. So it's just a really important thing. I want to just make sure folks are kind of understanding that. And Bob, I have another question for you, and it's related back to odors. So we had a few folks asking questions about how do we assess odors? So we had talked earlier about how we tend to refer to these as nuisance odors, and we know very well that they're not nuisances for people who are experiencing them. So one of the things people ask, and we kind of asked this from both sides of the table, how do we determine whether or not it violates the rule, that Rule 901 that we talked about in the beginning of the meeting today? I do want to just say that our staff in Air Quality Division do an extensive odor training, which sounds kind of weird, but it's basically where we acclimatize our nose to certain things that we might experience out in the field. So things like solvent odors, things like hydrogen sulfide odors, things that we know are going to potentially trigger those levels that would qualify as a violation of that Rule 901. So, but Bob, from a field perspective, when you're out there assessing whether or not a violation has occurred, can you just talk a little bit about the process and how we do that? Because we're definitely using our nose. We don't use a mechanical device like some other states do and some maybe third-party testing groups do, but we definitely use our nose, but we go to nose training, if that makes sense. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, that would be good too.
Sure, yeah. So we use our nose, and one of the main things I think most inspectors do is we look at the weather conditions, right? We look at the wind speed. We look at where's the wind coming from, which direction is it blowing to, and then orient ourselves around a facility where the complaint has come in for. So most of the time I will go upwind of the plant and see if I smell anything and make sure that there's nothing upwind that may be contributing to the complainant who's downwind of the facility. And then after going upwind, we travel to downwind and we see if we can then observe any objectionable odors. The things that we're looking for when we're out there smelling in neighborhoods and around places of business are, we're looking at the intensity of the odor. How strong is the odor? We look at how pervasive is it? Is it just located within a 1 block area, or is it encompassing a 4 or 5 block area of a neighborhood? We also look at duration. Is it there all the time, or does it come and go? And so it's those combination of things, intensity, pervasiveness, duration, that we use to evaluate whether it's objectionable or not, and then whether it's an unreasonable interference with the life and enjoyment of someone's property.
So it's a pretty stringent process that we go through to do this. It's using your nose, but like Bob said, when you get an odor complaint like this, you don't just go out and smell, for a couple of seconds and go, well, I don't smell anything, I guess there's no violation. It's no, very often you'll see inspectors getting out of their car, walking around, stopping, taking, nose readings, what is the level of this smell? What does it smell like? And that's all goes into, like Bob said, our evaluation of whether or not a violation incurred. So it's really, really important. And I don't want to really, reiterate this a lot more times, but it is really important to us for folks to be calling in when they're experiencing these kinds of things. I want to go back to the phones here, and I've got Andrew Bashy, if you don't mind, I have you next on my list. If you have a question, you can go ahead and ask.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can. Yeah, you sound great.
All right, perfect. So my name is Andrew. I'm an attorney with the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center. And one of the things that, basically kind of echoing the last person that called in, that one of the things that I've been really just kind of blown away by is the fact that this violation, particularly regarding the ducting, this was going on for, around 8 months or so before it was detected. And after the violation was issued, the facility was still allowed to operate, even though that was in violation of the permit condition. So I'm just curious to hear, what mechanisms EGLE is going to put in place to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Not just with Stellantis, but there are facilities being put in communities of color across the state, and it's a real serious concern for all those communities. I'm gonna leave it at that, because I got a whole list of questions, but that's the main one I wanted to get out.
Yeah, I know, Andrew, I saw that you had put some questions in the chat too. And just to really be clear, we're probably not going to get to all the questions tonight in this forum, but we will be responding to questions directly to folks, and we can share some of those overall questions and like a frequently asked questions type of document, just so that you all can see the questions that were asked and what our answers were. We just want to be very transparent about that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question on environmental justice and, what we're doing in the future for communities. And I think, as you know, right now in Michigan, and if you follow the news, that we have some, Title VI complaints that have been filed with EPA regarding some of this. We've had some recent cases that have been in the news in other parts of the state as well. And I know one of the things that Director Clark has been very, very adamant about lately, and even sent letters to EPA regarding the fact that right now in Michigan, we don't have the legislation that allows us to consider some of the things that maybe we should be considering in communities like this. We are working on things. I know that sounds so like cliche and unappreciated, and I can see a few of you probably rolling your eyes back in the back of your head right now, and I completely understand that. I know we are working diligently with our Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate to be able to get our My EJ screen out and running, which will help it be another tool for staff to use, for community to use, for hopefully industry to use when they're thinking about putting a new facility or a new line in a community of color or in an underrepresented community, like especially Bentano and the area around Stellantis. So something else for folks to use. But like you said, there's been a couple states that do have some pretty more robust environmental justice regulations that they can utilize. And we just don't have that right now. So working with our legislature to get some of those enacted is going to be definitely, something of a next step. Just when we're talking about making sure that facilities that are putting in new equipment, that are modifying existing equipment, and ensuring that that equipment is installed and operating properly. Like I said earlier, we are talking about that internally, just, what is our process? And I know Bob talked about what we do now. There's always room for improvement in that. So I appreciate you, bringing that up and emphasizing that again to us, because it is something that's important to us as well. We don't like to be in these situations where communities are being impacted because things didn't go the right way. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. If I could just
go right ahead. Yeah, go. Yeah.
Thing,
yeah, go ahead. Sure.
But, I think I understand that according to some of the test results that have come back that, maybe VOCs aren't beyond, or maybe may not be beyond the limits that are in their permit. But at the same time, it's still, this violation allowed for additional tons of VOCs that were not supposed to be there to be emitted into the community. And that's something that I think that I've heard time and time again from the folks on Beneteau that I speak to regularly. And I think it's important to recognize that and to voice that.
No, I do appreciate that. I definitely hear you on that. And I know I can't say that enough. And I know you guys don't want to hear that. But at this point, it is definitely one of those things that we need to look to future actions. I'm going to stay on the phones here. I've got Andrew Gadaris. Andrew, if you don't mind, I'm going to unmute you. And then if you can just introduce yourself. And then if you have a question, go ahead and ask.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Andy Gadaris. I'm the Senior Policy Counsel for Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. And I know we had a resident ask about elected officials. So I just wanted to take a moment to speak up on behalf of the Congresswoman in the office. This is something that we've been working on for years now, working with residents on Beneteau and elsewhere in the impact zone. And really this goes all the way back to the community benefits process, where a lot of these environmental concerns were raised then and were not addressed through that process. And, residents predicted that something like this would happen. And unfortunately, here we are. So I just wanted to echo on behalf of the office that we wholeheartedly support the residents who are continuing to speak up about this. We share the horror, really, that this went undetected for so long. And that even once it was detected, they were allowed to continue operating. So I'd just like to echo Andrew's point about, I hope EGLE learns some lessons from this and is able to more proactively detect permit violations and ensure compliance with permits in the future. And, we're in constant communication. I'm sure we'll be sending a follow-up letter with questions for both EGLE and MDHHS. But in parting, I just want to say, I hope that everyone from the state can really hear the frustration from residents who, for those 8 months that it went undetected, were complaining about health effects, were complaining about odors, and were being ignored. I just hope that, when I hear that, I hope the enforcement action doesn't take years. I mean, that's completely unacceptable. And so I hope that people working on this, if you lived on Beneteau, do you think you're working hard enough and fast enough? Like we need resolutions for these folks. And so I just hope that, the uncertainty that we've left residents with today about when they will see resolutions, if this was about an unknown odor in your backyard, would you be satisfied with that? And if not, I hope that motivates us all to keep working. If EPA or anyone from the state needs anything from our office, if there's anything we can do to mobilize resources or help folks out, please don't hesitate to reach out. You have our contact information. So I'll stop talking now, but thank you to all the residents who are on today voicing your concerns.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I appreciate you saying that.
Jennifer, can I respond to Andrew's, a couple of his points, please?
Yeah,
I just wanted to be clear that we did not say that this enforcement action was going to take years. So I just want to make sure that that's clear to everyone. We are working to try to get this completed as quickly as possible. I just wanted to also add that the enforcement process is not like issuing a ticket. So one of the critical things that we do in our enforcement process is we develop that corrective action compliance plan so that it's clear that the company is taking corrective actions to prevent future violations as well. If we were just issuing a penalty, we could do that very quickly. But that in Michigan, we actually have corrective actions and commitments that the company has to take, and we hold them to that legal contract for a number of years to ensure that the plant is operating properly. So that is what we're working on right now, and you can't get that done, in a very short period of time. So I just wanted to reiterate, we are putting a lot of resources into this. We're trying to move it as quickly as possible, and it will absolutely not take years. And we hear you and we appreciate your advocacy.
So Janine, thank you for that commitment. I appreciate you saying that too, because having that accountability is really important in this case. So I know we're at 8 o'clock. We're actually probably over 8 o'clock right now. And I want to let you guys go so you can, have the rest of your evening. But I do have Rep. Chang on the line. I want to have her be able to ask a question or speak to the community like Andy did. And then I do have just a couple tiny other things to talk to you folks about if you are interested in staying on, just to get more information about how you can talk to the folks that you heard from tonight. So Stephanie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you want to have the floor there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Chang, State Senator for the district. First, I just want to say thank you to EGLE and DHHS and EPA for putting this meeting together. I know it was probably frustrating for some people to listen to, but at the same time, I think it's actually really informative to know where you all are at and sort of the current status and what some of the plans are. I did put some of my questions in the chat, and I may have missed a few of the answers. I had to deal with a child's nosebleed, but I would echo a lot of what's already been said. In terms of the need to look at cumulative impact and environmental justice. I also am really concerned that there's not guidance for vulnerable people or advice for people on, if they're experiencing certain things, what they should do. I mean, I think that guidance, whether it's a one-pager or it's just some type of guidance about what is appropriate protections that are needed during times where there's a lot of odor or a lot of stuff that people are experiencing. I think that's really needs to be prioritized. And I also think that this meeting has really highlighted how, when we are comparing, levels of various substances to levels that, I just sort of I asked this in the Q&A, and I may have missed the answer to this question, but what these health comparison levels, who sets those levels? How often are they updated? Are they currently up to date? Do they accurately reflect, what an actual impact on people's health is? Those are all things that I think are going through my mind, and I'm sure are going through others too. Because if the conclusion from this analysis so far has been that there isn't a health risk, I think there's a lot of folks who would really question whether or not that's true. So I think it bears repeating that, maybe we really should actually look at those health comparison levels in the first place. And are they the right things that people need to be comparing to? So just to reiterate, recommendations for people who are vulnerable, I think are just really, really critical. And I hope that EGLE and DHHS will consider putting something together. Second thing was around the health comparison levels. Maybe we need to take a closer look at that. And then the third thing I did want to ask, is there the possibility of maybe amending the Stellantis air quality permit at some point in the near future? And wondering if that's something that can be done, when it could be done, and what would that process look like?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I appreciate the suggestion. I don't know if you guys don't mind, I kind of want to have Brandon just speak to whether or not some of those recommendations for sensitive groups might be in the health consult, because I'm not sure. And you can say yes or no, but I thought maybe you could speak to that for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the question, Senator. So that's definitely something that will pop up in our health consultation. That'll be a big part of it. We'll be looking into specific guidance for sensitive populations. And even before that's out, we're more than capable of putting together, like you said, a one-page fact sheet, informative information about, okay, if I have this condition, then what do I need to look out for? That's certainly something that we can put together and have out as a resource for anyone who needs it. And then I did want to also mention, I know this kind of relates to the sensitive populations and what to do if you are particularly sensitive to odors or to pollution in the air, particulates, that kind of things. I did mention on one of my slides that there's a resource called airnow.gov. And that is a source that can tell you, current levels of air quality in your community. I'm not positive if that includes any chemicals that can exacerbate or make worse any asthma symptoms. But it definitely gives you information about, if any of those pollutants are high enough that could potentially be, harmful for people who are sensitive if they're exercising outside or if they're, doing strenuous activities outside and they're breathing a lot. That's a really good resource to have. And I did mention that in the slide, but I did want to make sure I repeated that. And then lastly, the question about the health comparison values. I think I did address this earlier, but I'm happy to kind of restate what I said, which is that these are values that are set by agencies like ATSDR, like EPA and EGLE and MDHHS, and they're based on the best available science. They're based on the best that we have, the most science that we can go off of. But they're always open to being reviewed and renewed as that science comes in, as more data comes in that shows that, they may have different effects that we weren't aware of before, or they may happen at levels even lower than we thought. So they're always open to being reviewed and revised as the science dictates. And I hope that answered your question.
Thanks a lot, Brandon. So as far as the permit being amended, that does often happen through the enforcement process. I don't know that that's for sure going to happen through this one, but that does often happen. And it's definitely something that might be on the table for that, part of the process here. So because it is after 8:00 and I know that folks probably have other things that they need to do, I just want to close with a couple of remarks and a couple sort of actions that we're going to be taking. So the first thing that I just want to share is that I know we didn't get to all your questions, and I want to make sure that everybody gets to see what everybody's been asking. And I know, it's frustrating when we can't get to everything in one night, which is why we're going to have more meetings, because we want to talk with folks again. So we will develop some kind of a frequently asked questions type document that will have those questions in there with responses to them if folks are interested in that. Again, if you have one that you want to know the answer for before that happens, please reach out to us and just ask us. We're more than willing to talk with people. I just wanted to share this website again. This is our Stellantis website. It has all of the facilities that they have in Michigan, but it really focuses on the Detroit Assembly Complex where these issues have been happening. There's a lot of, there's the map that Marta showed with all, and that Brandon showed with all the sampling locations. So you can get a little bit of better chance to maybe look at that where it's not on a screen in front of you, for a couple of seconds. All of the sampling data that we have available to us right now has been posted on that website as well. You can find information like the air permits that they have, the most recent inspections that Bob has done, testing reports are on there. If you can't find something, please give me a call. I will help you find it. I want to make sure that people have as much information as they want to have in regard to this. On the screen right now, I have just folks' contact information. And because we do have a lot of people on the phone still, I'm going to just go ahead and read off a couple numbers in case you want to jot this down, or an email address in case you want to jot this down. I'm just going to do yours, Bob, just so that you know. And then if people want to get a hold of Bob for things, if you're someone who's calling in, he can always make sure to get you to the right person and give you that contact information. So his name is Bob Burns, and his email address is his last name and then the letter of his first name. So it's B as in boy, Y as in yellow, R as in Robert, N as in Nancy, E as in elephant, S as in Sam, and then the letter R as in Robert. And it's at Michigan, all spelled out, .gov as in government. And his direct phone line is 517-275-0493. And then I have a couple other numbers that I just want to read off. And I know folks that are watching online, this might be a little much, but I want to make sure folks on the phone.
Hey, Jen, sorry, I think you got the last two digits of Bob's phone number wrong. It's 39, correct?
Oh, did I say 93?
You said 93.
Oh,
yep.
I'm so sorry. Let me say that phone number again. I apologize. So Bob's number is 517-275-0439. I did say 93. 39 is the last two. I'm sorry, everyone. But I wanted to give you that pollution emergency number that you can call in with complaints, and that goes right to EGLE. That is a 24-hour-a-day number. So any time of day, you can give that number a call if you're having issues that you want to report. And that number is 1-800-292-4706. So definitely give that number a call. If you want to get a hold of the Detroit office they're only going to be there during regular business hours, but you can always call and leave a message if it's after hours and you don't need immediate assistance. But that number is 313-456-4681. So I just wanted to read a couple of those numbers out so folks on the phone have them. Again, greatly appreciate you guys taking the time to meet with us today. I know, again, we didn't get to all of your questions, but we'll work diligently to try to respond to as many of those as we can. Again, more sampling in the future, more opportunities for us to get together in the future and talk about the findings and bring this group together. So we'll definitely be letting people know when the recording is posted, be sharing the slides with you. So probably give you more information than you want, but definitely reach out to me either via email, or you can give me a call if you need something else, or give Bob a call or an email, and we'll definitely get back to you as soon as we possibly can. So just want to thank everybody one more time for joining us tonight. I know this can sometimes feel very frustrating, and your time is valuable. So we want to make sure that you're spending it getting information that you need. So take care, and we will talk to everybody soon.